Hi, and welcome to the Empath Podcast, where we discuss various topics about being an empath and spirituality. This is podcast number 20. I'm Gary, and I'm an empath and a healer, and I also run the Empath Zone. With me today are our two regular co-hosts. First, of course, is Jennifer Harris. How are you, Jen?
Hi, doing good. I'm Jennifer, and I am a demonologist and specialize in spirituality.
And the other is my constant thorn in the side, Mari. How are you, Mari?
Hi, I'm okay. And my specialty is psychic attacks and spirituality.
And today we are fortunate to have a special guest. Her name is Bevin Niemann. So welcome, Bevin. It's wonderful that you could join us.
Thank you, Gary. I was really honored that you invited me to be on today.
You're welcome. And today's topic is about how people use video games as an analogy of leveling up in real life spiritually. So over to you, Jen.
Yep, that's what we're going to focus on today, is how people use video games as their spirituality. And Bevin had written an amazing article about how people level up in their spiritual lives as if they are playing a video game. And Bevin, how did you come up with this idea?
Well, I'm actually old enough, and I'm going to date myself here, to remember when the first video games came out. Space Invaders and all of those things, being in the arcade as a kid. And then I was probably more like an amateur gamer in my 20s, Legend of Zelda and all of that goes back there. And then when I was in college, I had a classmate who was in the virtual reality program. Virtual reality had just gotten developed at that time. And the university we went to had a virtual reality room, and I got invited to go in and wear the goggles and be immersed in that. And, you know, of course, the technology was very new at the time. It was really clear that you were in sort of an artificial environment. But I was just always really fascinated by this juxtaposition between reality and fantasy. And in particular, this article was inspired by this idea that from a spiritual perspective, we incarnate into this life as a character, as a personality. And we travel and have adventures with other people who are also characters. And there's just so much that we can explore around this. But that was really, my inspiration behind the article.
That's awesome. I know I loved video games when I was younger, and yes, Zelda was one of my favorites until I got into the Final Fantasy stuff. Those were extremely awesome games.
They were.
But I've noticed that a lot of those video games similar to that, people were actually taking their spirituality and abilities to process things of the spiritual nature as if they were in the video game.
Mm-hmm.
And as your article had said, that people tend to level up their lives spiritually as if they are working on a video game. If someone, let's say, dies in this video game that we call life, do they gain their experience back, or you think they are going to start over the level from scratch?
That's a great question. And I think that when I was actually playing video games, I found that to be the most frustrating part, as I had worked really, really hard and found this little piece of treasure and pulled this lever to be able to get into this door. And then I would die and I had to go back all the way to the beginning and do it all over again. And as I started to study as a spiritual student, particularly around the ideas of karma and reincarnation, this kind of came back up, right? This idea that, if we don't address it, if we don't succeed at a particular karmic lesson, or if we don't balance karma with someone else, we indeed get to like come back in, reincarnate into the game and try it all over again. Now, some traditions say that your soul carries that learning forward. And then others say, you know, you kind of come in and you forget everything you've ever known and you have to start fresh again. And I'm certain that most of those of us who are in the spiritual world are also a little bit frustrated with that piece. If I could just remember all these things that I knew from however many lifetimes I had before. But I personally believe that we gather that learning and bring it forward. But there is a remembering process that we go through. I know that for myself personally, as an empath, as a very perceptive person, as an intuitive, I have had these gifts since I was a child. I just didn't know quite how to apply them. I didn't really understand that. So part of the purpose of life is learning and growing into that. But you touched upon this question, you know, what happens when people pursue it like a video game? And being particularly in the metaphysical community, I saw what I call metaphysical fundamentalism, which is just about the same thing as religious fundamentalism, only it's a different set of beliefs. It's like, okay, I have to do this meditation this certain way, and I have to say these certain words, and there's an invocation for this, and whatever that looks like. And I don't mean to be judgmental of anyone. That's not my point. But when we get into that place where we feel like there's just a certain path or a certain pattern or a certain way that we have to do something, I'm really much more interested in how does each person as an individual express that spirituality? At what pace do we each need to go? And that will only go as fast as we're ready for that learning to happen. Sometimes we have to repeat levels again. Yes. And we can't really go from level 3 to level 25, and just skip over everything else. Whether that's fair or unfair, that seems to be my own life experience around that.
But I have noticed that if you repeat levels each time you do it, you get a little better at it and more efficient. Yeah,
definitely. There's a deeper understanding of what happened and how you interacted, and a broader awareness of how to move forward.
So when let's say you get a karma point for doing good deeds, and so when you do that and you pass away, was that karma, quote, saved? And so you can access it in the next life? Or do you have to wait for that to build up until you were able to access it?
That's a good question. It's sort of like, is there a karmic bank account, and
yes,
how much credit do you have to accrue before you can, buy the next thing? Or I wrote this other article called Living in a Reward and Punishment System, which really kind of came into play with your question, I think, and how so much of what we seem to do and be driven by as human beings is whether we're moving towards a reward or moving away from or have an adversity to punishment. But that often puts us in a place where we're coming from a much more instinctual, reactive place, it seems like, rather than sort of consciously choosing our way of being, our actions. Everyone is going to have reactions to what happens. Everyone's going to have emotional reactions, mental thoughts about things. I think as I go farther in my own personal path, I'm able to recognize when that's happening at a much quicker rate. So I'm able to see, oh, I'm kind of triggered by this right now. I'm going to step back for a moment, and I'm going to sit with that and see what comes up, as opposed to just taking action or reacting in a way that may lead to negative karma. Now, that doesn't mean that we're never going to react negatively. It happens to everyone. And when we do, a lot of people who are on a spiritual path may then tend to beat themselves up about that. You know, like, oh, I should have been able to do this better, or I should have known, or I've been more conscious. And so there's this balance between, I think, being dedicated to your growth and also being kind to yourself and pacing yourself at a rate that you can handle it.
So when people, quote, level up in this spiritual learning process, they think that they can or should be leveling up the same rate as other people, other players. And if they don't meet that mark, they get frustrated. And we had talked about this before, that when someone is doing something a certain way, they may be really good at it, but you are just failing completely at this thing, and you can't figure out how to get through this because you just haven't got the tools yet.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be like taking someone and putting them in a game that they've never played before and expecting them to do exactly what everybody else does that's been seasoned veterans.
Right.
That happens a lot, actually.
Oh, yes. When we have our karma and we're trying to work through it, one person might work through their karma a lot faster than another person. But the problem is when we have this, quote, karma bank, if we do get one, all of that negative karma can't be a bad thing, because you get kind of a reward for the negative karma in some ways.
Right. I mean, if you're able to look at karma instead of punishment, you're able to look at it as available learning or a lesson or a potential for growth. I think that really changes things. And I really wish I could remember where I read this particular philosophy, but there was an author who said, you know, what if everyone's working on the same 100 life lessons, for example, and I'm working on number 56 and you're working on number 25. So if we're to compare ourselves to the other person, you know, maybe you've already mastered number 56, and I look at you and I think, wow, it looks so easy for her. I don't understand why I'm struggling over here, but number 25 is kicking your ass, you know? And so
Yeah.
I thought this was such a great analogy, that when we start comparing ourselves to others, especially on the spiritual path, what looks really easy or effortless from the outside is probably not. You know, even things that we're good at, even things I'm good at, it still requires a real deep dive sometimes. It requires me to look at myself in a way that sometimes you don't like to have to look at yourself. And so I think releasing the comparisons is going to be really helpful. And the reason that video games are so popular is they do draw upon this sort of competitive nature of our society, which says, you know, you're out there to level up, and you're out there to get the most bonus points. And there's even, you know, screens that show the top ranking players, you know, so that you can progress towards that. But when we approach spirituality in that way, it just doesn't work the same. And it's not as satisfying for us in that way.
Now, when someone is leveling up themselves as if they were in a video game, so let's say, okay, I'm on the third dimension, and I know a lot of people are talking about this fifth dimensional thing, everybody's on it, but I'm working on the third dimension, and I'm thinking, okay, so I work on this third dimension, I learned how to meditate, I learned how to do this and that, so now I'm already progressed to the fifth dimension because, you know, everybody else is there and that's where I want to be.
Right.
Would that be a good idea to do that, though?
Well, it depends on whether you believe there's sort of an internal locus of control or external. So it reminds me of the movie The Matrix, which was like really mind blowing for me back in the day, and I think it's developed into video games as well. Where this idea that we're living in a simulated reality, and there's this other reality, right, that everyone's a part of, but some people know and some people don't know about it, and that there's this external group of beings or computerized system or whatever kind of pulling the strings, trying to control that. Or if you're a person that believes that you have an internal locus of control, that you actually manifest your life through what you think and your actions and your emotional processes, or if you think it's a combination, that's a possibility as well. I kind of feel like it's a combination of those two things. But depending on which one you believe in, you would either feel that you're only going to progress as far as something else will let you do that, or you're going to think I can do anything and I could go as fast as I want to, when in fact it's probably something more in the middle. It's that you do definitely have responsibility. One of the things I've been thinking a lot about lately is called spiritual adulthood, right? It's like I went from a place where I was like a spiritual child, and that extended way into my 30s. And at some point, I feel like I flipped over into the beginnings of a spiritual adulthood. And that was great in some aspects and felt very much like a heavy responsibility in others, because then you have this deeper level of awareness and responsibility to what you bring to the world. But can you push that any faster than it will go? I don't know that I believe that you can. So you can definitely dedicate yourself to a regular spiritual practice, whatever that looks like for each person. And you're going to learn, and that's going to definitely move you faster than someone who doesn't. So if in fact, for example, one person meditates every single day and someone else doesn't, there could be judgment around that. Or some people are really dedicated to a yoga practice, or they're, doing shamanic ceremonies, or whatever practice that they choose. There can be this judgment of others who aren't progressing or don't even know about those things. And then there can be a look at people who are, probably been studying for years and years, and it maybe even moved beyond a specific practice into something that's more of an integration of spirituality into their life. And when we try to compare ourselves to others, I think it becomes really unhealthy in this spiritual path.
Absolutely. I would agree with that, because when no matter what the situation is, you compare yourself to someone else, you're always going to feel inadequate. And a lot of it is because, some people just are not meant to, let's say, astral travel. They practice and they're just not able to do it. And I believe wholeheartedly it's because they're truly not meant to be doing this in this lifetime. And so they get frustrated because they can't do it, but there's always a reason why you can't, or you haven't accomplished it yet. And that's where a lot of people get frustrated, is because, well, so-and-so does it, why can't I? Especially when you're talking about people that astral travel or do certain things of a spiritual nature, like psychics. Well, if we're all intuitive, all empaths, why are we not all the same type of empath? Why do I have the gift to see something and this person can't see nothing? So when we're talking about your article on leveling up, in your article it says, hardships absolutely bring growth to our soul, as do the people we have chosen to walk in this life with. However, it's also true that sometimes things suck and life doesn't go as planned. We're pissed off or feel blue or super frustrated. We get sick or injured unexpectedly. When something like that happens, people tend to feel stuck. And that's where you go on. This is, we feel stuck and continue to feel stuck as a process, and instead of working through it, you just give up. Is there any advice that you would give for that, instead of stop playing the game, but how are you going to get through this to the next level?
Well, I think in my own personal experience, and then, working with clients and teaching for so long, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is the hardest part of the spiritual journey. It's really great to be in a room with other spiritual seekers and to be doing a group meditation or a sound healing. The energy is amazing. You're connected. That's when things are really awesome on the spiritual path. It's when, life happens and the unexpected pops up, or something happens to really scare you, or something happens to one of your family members that you really get this chance to dive in and see where you are. I think it highlights, where am I really, because I can sort of talk the talk in these really beautiful moments. Where am I really, and what do I still need to work on? And, it's not always easy for us to stop when we're in the middle of something that's very stressful or painful and be able to see the lesson. Sometimes we can never see that. And sometimes we can only see it later. And sometimes I believe as we become more conscious that the reason some of these things happen, I don't believe that everything happens as a karmic lesson, but I believe a lot of things do. Some things just, I think, happen randomly, and some things happen as a result of other people's choices that we can't do anything about. But there's other things that are a karmic lesson. And again, just like getting triggered in that moment when you can realize, wow, I'm going through this thing. What is there for me? Who is this asking me to be right now? What is it asking me to do? What am I here to learn? If you're able to get to that point, and you may be able to, and you may not be able to, and you really open yourself up to what will be revealed, this is when you actually level up organically, right? You're not trying to do it. You're not trying to do it on purpose. It happens as a result of going through these life experiences. So that's what I can say about that part of the article. And I was really speaking from my own personal experience on a recent level, that this is when you find out who you are, what you believe in, how much inner strength you have, where you still need some work. And it's both really, really tough and very, very beautiful as a reveal, in my own experience.
I've had experience similar to that, where people have literally gotten stuck on what they believe they know to what they really know. And looking yourself in the mirror is one of the hardest things in life, because you don't want to see yourself as anything less than what you think you are.
Right.
And so if you see something wrong with you, you don't want to address that because it hurts. But it's something that you definitely need to address.
What seems to hurt more in the long run is not being willing to look in the mirror. The pain of looking in the mirror and making some changes in your life can be a real challenge, can be a real difficulty. But it's also pretty temporary, usually, in my experience. The pain of stuffing that down and pretending like everything's okay when it's not, that stays with you, and that eats away on every level, particularly the physical health level.
And they do a lot. They don't want to face the emotions because, that emotional baggage really sucks. Now, when you came onto this realization and everything about what you're doing now, you have told us before that you have been doing this for how long?
Well, I found out that I was an empath about 6 years ago. I guess I'll say I officially found out I was an empath. I've been an empath my whole life. And I also found out that I was a highly sensitive person, which is a little bit different, and began seeking out other people like myself, developed a community here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so we have local workshops and about 500 members in our community. I've been a teacher for a long time, so I've been teaching live workshops, online webinars, and I'm also a coach, a life coach for sensitive people, for empaths. And really recently I found that my work is moving in a slightly different direction in order to really honor my own gifts. And so I created a new Facebook community called Perceptive Souls. And it's really for people who are newly awakening on their spiritual path, people who are empaths, they're intuitives, healers. And what I've found is there's a group of people who always receive these messages, like everything is talking to them, whether it's they keep seeing the same word over and over and over, keep talking about the same topic, or they've actually had a visitation from a loved one who's passed, or in my case, I connect very deeply with spirit animals. Lots of different ways that messages come to people who are perceptive. But a lot of people shut that down because there's, until recently, probably not a lot of safe spaces to talk about what happens. They worry about people thinking they're crazy, or that there's no one who understands what they experience. And so most of my clients have turned off their gifts out of fear or misunderstanding, and try to kind of fit in with the normative cultural society and how they tell us that we're supposed to be. But again, it's just like we were talking about, kind of repressing your emotions and repressing those things that you don't want to look at. Repressing your gifts does not allow you to live the fullest life possible, and to extend those gifts out into the world, and to help in whatever way make the world a better place and transform that. And so I help clients take that inner knowing, to trust that again, and then expand that into outer action, because it's really great to have a knowing of something, but what we get confused about is like, what do I do with that? How do I take action in my life, and how do I trust what I know? And so I've designed this 90-minute collaborative coaching intuitive session called Discover Your Soul Symbol. And we start from a point of inspiration and work together to develop this archetype, this visual symbol, auditory symbol, creative symbol that a person can use and take forward to coach themselves for the rest of their life. It's been really amazing to see how each person brings something different. I had one client who had a particular piece of music that they just couldn't stop listening to. And so we went through and listened to each of the different instruments that came up and related that to what was happening in his life. And he can use that as a symbol. Like, is what's happening now, is that like the violins, or is that like the flute solo? Which one is this? And some people have used that visually. Other people like to build things with their hands. So that's where we start from, a point of inspiration. So it's been an amazing experience to see just in 90 minutes how much of a transformation and how much people can connect in with their intuitive knowing and really start to trust that again. So that's just awesome. A little bit about what I do.
Yeah, you'll have to give us a link for that so we can let other people find this course, because it truly sounds enlightening and fascinating.
Right. I'm actually in the process of redesigning my website. It'll be perceptivesouls.com. And it will be live the first week in February. So wonderful. happy to have people come and engage with it and get some more information about me there.
Okay, and we will link all that below in the description of the podcast. I have one more question for you, Bevin.
Sure.
I had a client that had been going through a lot of issues in their life. Their go-to backup thing when I have no clue what's going on is to essentially make things up. And a lot of things I've found, like movies, TV shows, video games. And have you ever had a client that actually felt that they were a character in their favorite video game and they based their life off of this character?
I have not yet had a client of that nature, although I did have someone in my family that was more along those lines. And I think that, you know, this exploration of what is fantasy and what is reality is really interesting to me, because I was always the person that read all the fantasy literature and loved the fantasy movies and could imagine myself very easily, especially as an empath, right? Putting myself in and going, oh, what if I was this character in the 1800s and this is what it would look like? So it's a really thin line. You know, I would say that probably mainstream psychology would say that there was something wrong with that person. It's just my opinion because I'm not a trained psychologist or a therapist. But I would say that it just depends on whether the fantasy that people engage in, and some people go to Renaissance fairs and dress up and they embody that character, and people are actors and they embody a character. Yeah. Does it interfere with relationships and being able to live and function in life? You know, if it's starting to interfere with that, if someone is not able to actually engage at a sort of normative level with other people in their life, it seems like it would be a concern at that point. Yeah. If it's something they do for fun and they enjoy that, I guess I'm probably a little more open and liberal about that. But that would be where I would say you would want to explore, you know, when it starts to interfere with you being able to like actually function. Then fantasy becomes something that is not healthy. Just like it can become an addiction, just like anything else.
Yes, video games, the whole video game genre stuff has become a serious addiction issue because people want to disconnect. And I have seen more and more of people doing this with their leveling up their life. One particular guy, every day it was, oh, I reached this level in my spiritual nature because I meditated for 5 minutes yesterday. And some other ones is like, oh yeah, I'm having this problem with my astral projection stuff, and I go and I look and they've been playing, let's say, Diablo, and everything he's telling me about his astral experience was actually in the video game. And so it was a huge problem because I could not figure out whether this was actually a problem or if it was something that he truly did believe was happening and how to fix that for him. Right. Well, me not personally fix it for him, but help him work through it, you know?
Right. I think that same thing can happen with spiritual teachings. You know, people read a particular spiritual teaching and we know there's, you know, literally hundreds, maybe thousands of spiritual teachings out there. Yeah. And really began to live in that way, almost like, you know, there's guru worship, there's all that kind of thing that goes on. And again, I think when you're able as a person to be self-reflective, when you're able to make independent decisions about your life, regardless of what someone else is telling you, you need to be your due. I think when you can engage in fantasy to the extent that that's fun and entertainment, but then also do your dishes and pay your bills and, you know, do what you need to do as a human being, then I think there can be a healthy balance. But it can be easy to tip that into a place that's not. And sometimes in my observation, people kind of go from I just had this awakening and now I'm all in. I'm swinging that pendulum all the way over here, and I'm going to do this 24/7. I'm going to meditate for hours on end. Like, there's a real, like, all in kind of aspect to that. And I think that's kind of normal. But then eventually it kind of swings back and maybe balances a little bit in the middle. And that's it's a little healthier between those two things. That's just my observation about what you're talking about.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. So you have created a safe and supportive space to share experiences. Is your group a privated group, or is it public?
It is a private group. I wanted people to be able to open up and talk about all types of ways that they receive intuitive messages. So it is private, and they can ask to join. I just have some quick questions, and then and get them in, get them to be a member.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this. We really appreciate that.
Well,
did you have any questions?
Well, I know that the three of you, and particularly you, Gary, have been working with empaths for so long, and this is something that I'm really excited to see gain much more mainstream awareness. Empath was the thing like they whispered about in the first Star Treks, and even before that a little bit. But now, there's books and blogs, and I'm in several of the empath Facebook communities, and there's thousands of people, and it's really amazing to see that sort of awakening for people to really come into their own and be able to honor their gifts. So I don't know if you have thoughts about how that's changed in the time that you've done this work.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited that this is finally starting to become mainstream. When I first started writing about empaths back in the early 2000s, there wasn't any information online, which is why I started to put it online. But now it seems to be everywhere, and it seems to be more and more accepted. I've lost count of the people who have come to me saying, I thought there was something wrong with me, but I realized there isn't. I'm an empath. So it's step one of an awakening, and I believe that the time of the empath is coming, and it will one day be something which you won't have to be ashamed of being. People act like it's a bad thing, but quite frankly, it's like saying that if you can see or hear that's a bad thing, it's just another sense. And anyone can develop it, really, because we all have that ability. I think the problem is that there is so much fear attached to psychic abilities, and that people will say, well, it's if we're trafficking with the devil if you are able to do things, completely forgetting that Christ was actually able to do the same thing too. And I can tell you, he certainly wasn't trafficking with the devil. So being an empath is something that is finally starting to become accepted. And in a sense, you could compare it to like when people used to be gay and used to hide it. Now they're sort of out there, with pride, and even, those niche communities which used to be so underground are becoming mainstream. So I'm really excited about it, and I believe the next step is becoming aware of all the hidden levels which are around us, which so many experience but they don't have any idea what's going on. And I'm putting all the building blocks into place in the hope that one day it will be able to be mainstream too, because it needs to be, because ignoring it doesn't make it go away. But yeah, it's been a great journey, and I'm just hoping it will get better and better.
Well, I'm so grateful that the three of you in particular are doing this work. And I remember watching the character, now that we're talking about characters, Deanna Troi on The Next Generation, and thinking, wow, there's an entire world of people who are empathic, and they are sought after in the galaxy for their skill and their gift, and how amazing that was to actually see that and then realize later that this was a part of who I am. and really just coming into my own to honor and accept that. So
Absolutely.
thank you for you and for everyone who's spreading and building awareness of this out there.
Thank you for coming
Thank you.
on our podcast today. It is greatly appreciated, as Jennifer said. And yeah, we would definitely like to keep in touch and maybe come back for another session where we can discuss other things you've been talking about, because you have spoken about a lot of different things too.
Oh, thank you. I would love to do that. Absolutely.
And I wish you well on your work, because your work is very needed, and I appreciate you actually going through all of the steps to do this for other people learning to be who they are. It's a really wonderful thing when you're able to have a safe space like yours to go to and learn.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all we have for this podcast. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. And remember, if you want to contact us, you can contact us on podcast@empathsupport.com. Any final words, Jen?
Just remember that you are who you are, and don't force things that you don't think you're progressing fast enough, because who knows, the next person might actually be having more difficulty than you are.
And Mari, though we didn't get much to say to you, what do you think?
When you're on your spiritual path, remember to enjoy every aspect, be it positive or negative or neutral.
And all I've got to say is, don't let a video game define your personal path. They are there to help remind you of what you can do, not what you should be. Thank you very much all, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, here are some others you might find interesting. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear about them. Leave a comment and maybe even a like.